two issues that we'll be discussing today. One is the private members bill, and the second one is the importance of natural hydrogen as an alternative fuel. Let's begin. So these are the two important issues: reviving a far-sighted but forgotten bill mechanism, which is there in your Hindu editorial, and the second one is how can India tap its natural hydrogen potential. Before we begin this, I know some of you might not have the basics in polity. Let's understand why we are reading about private members bill. Between an individual and a state, how many of you have, by the way, how many of you have political science optional? We are all individuals, right? Why are we accepting a government or the idea of a state? Can anyone tell me? Just participate. Why do we need a state or a government? Why are we accepting a government? We are basically delegating the responsibility of dealing with our day-to-day life to someone else. It's like a contract, right? And that contract is called the social contract. The relation between an individual and a state is described by the idea of a social contract. The nature of that social contract in the context of India is democracy, right? Where everyone participates in that idea. So, what is the takeaway here? The idea of a democracy. We the people, for the people. By the way, who gave this quotation? Great. So, how many of you by-hearted the preamble? I recognize some faces from the intro class. Right. What is the starting line of the preamble? We the people of India. Okay. So, in India, the nature of democracy is parliamentary democracy. Why do we have a parliament? Basically to make laws. The legislation as a function is delegated to parliament. Who are there in the parliament? So does it mean only the party in power? If we go by just the numerical strength, roughly around 35 to 45% of the population voted for the party in power. Historically, it doesn't matter how many seats they won, but look at the percentage of population. So, is it safe to say that the rest of the population did not want the party in power? However, we still have a government which is in power with that 35-45% historically. So, what about the rest of the people? How will their voice be represented? Again, it should happen through parliament because that's the only forum where your voice can be heard. There can be important legislative issues, anything of national importance. Maybe we can have MPs from the opposition who bring certain expertise to the table. But since they're not a part of the government, their voice might not be heard. So whenever you're looking at any issue with respect to the legislature, I want you to follow this framework. First, you should always understand the idea of a democracy. Why? Because it is representing the people of this country. And how is that representation institutionalized? What do you mean by institutionalization? You create a mechanism. See, it should not be arbitrary. Every day, you need certain processes in place so that there is no need to coordinate on a daily basis. Like the moment you wake up, you brush your teeth, fresh up, everything, it becomes a habit because it became a part of an institutionalized idea. Right. Similarly, for day-to-day functioning of our democracy also, we need institutionalization. The strength of a democracy is not based on just individuals alone. We need institutions to take that idea forward. Right. So, representation should follow, I mean, here representation is for lawmaking power, and then that lawmaking power should be institutionalized. Okay? And whenever you are carrying out the so-called analysis for mains exam, I told you, you're all problem solvers. Right? So, in order to fix the problem, first of all, you need to identify the problem. What are the systemic gaps? And when you understand the systemic gaps, you arrive at a solution. This is the usual framework that I expect you to understand and follow for any parliament related issue. What is the idea of democracy? Because we are focusing on representation. In this case, the idea of representation is linked to lawmaking power that should be institutionalized, and that institutionalization will create some systemic gaps. And when those systemic gaps are fixed, we will have an effective functioning democracy. This is the framework in which you should analyze an issue. Are we clear? Good. Now, let's come to the idea of private member bill. Article 79 of the Indian Constitution says that, see, what is the idea of a parliament? Who all are present in the parliament? Components of parliament and the president. Why is the president a part of the process? After his assent, the bill becomes an act. Okay, for that reason, he is part of the parliament. Now, when this bill, the initiation point, this bill is created usually by the executive. In India, do we have a strict separation of powers? How many of you understand the concept of separation of powers? How many of you do not understand the concept of separation of powers? It's okay, please participate so that we can know clarity. How many? Okay. In simple words, if I put an entire decision making power in the hands of a single person or an individual or an institution, don't you think it will become too powerful? So, if you separate the decision making processes, it might be slow, but it is transparent, accountable, and effective. So, legislature's job is just to make a law. Judiciary's job is just to ensure that the constitutional principles are protected. And executive's job is just to ensure that whatever the decisions, policy decisions that are being taken, they are enforced. So the beginning point, we are going a bit slow because we are also trying to understand the principles of polity here. We are beginning at legislature. So who constitutes this legislature? All the MPs, but not just the MPs in power. What if a very good idea, which is relevant to this country, starts from the opposition leader? Do you think he'll stand a chance? In today's competitive democracy, just because the idea is brought forth by the opposition party, there is very little chance that it will see the light of the day. Right? Do you think it should happen? Do you think that private member bills like that, okay, we'll get back to the definition of the private member bills, but just tell me, what's your idea? Should an opposition leader have the right to bring a bill to the parliament? Why? Exactly. He's also representing some constituency. He belongs to the legislature, and by the virtue of the idea of democracy, parliamentary democracy, they all possess a right. So, the definition of a private member bill can now be understood. Okay, before that, whatever we discussed, we'll briefly see some points. What is legislature? It is the supreme lawmaking body under Article 79. We already saw this. But why should legislatures have, or the MPs should have this power to make laws? Because first of all, let's look at this core values. You can actually note these keywords down. You can use them in your answers. Deliberative democracy. What do you mean by deliberative democracy? What do you mean by deliberation? Deliberate. Guess. More. I want more participation. What do you mean by deliberate? Okay. In international relations, there is a very famous keyword, the DNA approach for international relations. Dialogue, negotiation, and an action. DNA approach. Why is this considered to be a good way or a civilized way to conduct your foreign policy? Because we have seen after the World War that wars don't yield any solutions. It's the dialogue. So similarly, in a democracy, discussions are very important. And what is the forum for that discussion? Parliament. And this deliberative democracy is considered important because it facilitates participation of all the MPs. So deliberative democracy encourages debate. And it is the constitutional morality. What do you understand this principle of constitutional morality? Because this is also a previous year mains question, probably 2021. The idea of constitutionalism. What do you understand by that? Okay. What exactly is the word constitutionalism meaning? Okay, you have to abide by, that is constitutional morality. Okay, but what is constitutionalism? A government which is limited by the powers imposed by the constitution, a limitation on the government. That limitation is the keyword here. Okay. So similarly here, by the very nature of that constitutionalism, one of the principle is checks and balances. So you can see that private member bills and enforcing them, like institutionalizing them, is a way of ensuring that constitutionalism and act as a checks and balances on the executive. What is the executive here? The ministers, the party in power. Usually they have the numerical strength to pass the bills, and therefore only their agenda will be taken forward. Private member bills is a way to avoid that and to make even the opposition members a part of the legislative process. And that's why constitutional morality. Next, institutional pluralism. What does this mean? These are some very important ideas which are not there in your editorial, but you have to include them. Because when you read a newspaper, you should be developing that aptitude to map it to a certain answer framework. Otherwise, what's the point? You will have many such articles, but you have to bring them within a structure. Once you understand the structure, no matter what the article says, they will become repetitive. Okay. Institutional pluralism. What does it mean? After reading, can you guess? Alternative voices in policy making. What does it mean? What do you mean by this alternative voices? See, if we take a look at India's parliamentary democracy, we are based on a party system. How are political parties supposed to be organized? They're centered around an ideology. When you have an ideological bias, the possibility of a contrarian view or something that is against that ideology becoming a part of the law process becomes very small. The scope becomes small. So, private member bills, that is one mechanism of ensuring this institutional pluralism. multiple voices or multiple ideologies coexisting together, because that coexistence is what makes the democracy of India a very vibrant one. Clear? That's why private member bills, especially legislations, are important. We discussed this checks and balances, which is important because it will ensure that the dominance of the executive, which is the ministers. So, what is a private member bill? By definition, any bill that is introduced by a non-minister. Okay? Any bill which is introduced by a non-minister is private member bill. Does it mean even a bill introduced by the ruling party MP, is that a private member bill? Yes or no? What is the importance? Like we said, you can look at the highlighted one. It keeps legislative creativity from becoming executive monopoly. What do you mean by executive monopoly? Like I told you, a party in power will have a certain agenda, and only that agenda is hijacking the parliamentary time. There is little room for discussion, deliberation on issues brought forth by the opposition members. So this private member bills is an institutionalized mechanism that will stop them from happening. Okay. Is there a constitutional basis for this private member bills? You have Article 105. What is the Article 105 saying here? You have freedom of speech and expression in Parliament. Why do you think this is important? You all know, you all have this Article 19, right? Freedom of speech. Why do you think speech is important? Why should we express our opinions? See, what is so unique about human beings that we feel the need to express ourselves, when that's not the case for animals, it's not the case for any other living being, right? Why do you think that need to express is so central to the human thought, that without which we are not considered human? The very idea of the word fundamental right, I discussed, right? The very idea of the word fundamental right itself signifies that if you take that right away, we are no longer human beings. Why? Because human beings have this unique feature of conscious thought. We have the ability to think, unlike any other living individual. How many of you from anthropology optional? How many of you opted for anthro? How many of you are yet to decide your optionals? Okay. So in anthro, you will see that our cranial capacity in evolution, that is our brain size, it enlarges as evolution progresses from apes to human beings. That's because we have more sophisticated ability to think. So the very nature of human beings to express their thoughts, otherwise will go mad. Even legislators have the same freedom of expression, right? And that should be institutionalized. So Article 105 is that legislative creativity. Like you try to bring forth some ideas which are of public importance, which may not be recognized by the ruling party or the executive. That is what Article 105 says. Article 107, it's about the procedure for introducing a bill. Even private member bills are a part of that Article 107. And then you have the Article 123, which says that only Parliament, that is, what is the procedure for passing a bill? A bill is introduced in one of the houses. It should be passed in one house, then passed to the other house, then a president second. All of this procedure is there in Article 123. And is it only the constitutional provisions? Or do we also have Supreme Court guidelines or Supreme Court judgments, which should also be included in your answers? So there is one very, very famous case called the Kyoto Holohan case. Okay. This case spoke about how it is important to protect the voice of the legislators. You can quote this case also. It's not there in the article probably. You can note this. Okay. Now we'll see why are the private member bills decreasing. See, what is the procedure for a private member bill? They're usually reserved for Fridays. Parliament has a certain mechanism to function, right? So all these bills which are supposed to be tabled, even for tabling them and bringing them to discussion, you need certain discussion before that. Is it important? Is it so crucial for this bill to see the light of the day or take the time of the parliamentarians? Even that will be deliberated. Okay. So on every Friday, this private member bills will be placed between, they're supposed to be placed between 11 to 4:30 p.m. But you know, it's a weekend. So they will be pushed. There will be less attendance. And there is no rules of procedure there. So they're not taken so seriously. Either they will be after the question hour. Question hour is the first hour where you will see all this on Sunset TV, right? Parliamentarian speaking. That's the first hour. After that hour only, all this agenda will be taken up. But usually it will get adjourned. So you don't have any private member bills being discussed. Since independence, we have only had 14 instances where this private member bills saw the light of the day and they became a law. Okay. So if you ever get a question that no private member bill was ever passed, it's false. So prelims will have two kinds of questions. You must have all seen the statements, right? If one of the statements says no private member bills were passed after independence, it's false. They can also ask in a different way. No private member bills were passed in the last decade. It can be asked, right? So we'll have to see how many bills were passed. So articles like this, editorials like this are a cue for you to think like this. Are there any bills in the past decade? How can prelims question be asked? How can mains question be asked? Unless you train your mind to think like that, newspaper articles will make no sense to you. It's of very low utility. In the first class, like I've told you, it's about how you use this newspaper editorials as a way of thinking. It's like a gym equipment for you to train your muscle, memory muscle on, or your thinking muscle on. Okay. Next up, this anti-defection law, which is the 52nd Amendment Act. Anybody knows the context? Schedule 10 was added. But what is the purpose? Yeah. So, MPs, after winning from one party, they're jumping to the another party, which is creating instability. To stop that problem, of course, we will be discussing this anti-defection law in much detail in your classes. But for now, just understand that this is a law which was meant to stop individuals from shifting their loyalties. As a result, what happened? Party became the unit of importance. So collectively, the decisions of the party were enforced. Like there is one person called a whip. That whip will tell the rest of the party people or the MPs of that party to vote on a certain line. See, this is the agenda of the party, so you should vote according to this. If you go against this, action will be taken. Because going against that idea of the party is usually considered that their loyalties are shifting. But what if the individual parliamentarian also has certain agenda? Like he wants to bring forth some agenda. There is very little room for that to happen in the after the 52nd Amendment Act. That's also one issue. Okay. Procedural neglect. Like I told you, we don't have a dedicated time. We don't have a dedicated time on a Friday to make this happen. What happened? Like say for example, if you want to quote that private member bill importance is reducing, you have to take some statistics from newspaper articles. So today's article showed that out of the roughly 80 private member bills which were introduced in the budget session, none of them were discussed. So they were all sidelined. So this is a substantiation of the point. If you just write in your answers that private member bill importance is decreasing, how should I trust you? You need to substantiate it, right? So you have to use newspaper articles for substantiation. Clear? Okay. Now you have to ask, we are giving so much importance to private member bills, but do they really have any impact? Do you think they'll have an impact? Why are we even dismissing the ability of a party or the party member or even an individual MP who has a very brilliant idea that can be of public importance, just because he's not a party member or ruling, he's just because he's an opposition member or just another MP from the ruling party. He need not be a minister. He need not wield the same kind of influence. But they can also add value to this country, right, through these laws. So what is the real impact? PMBs can sometimes highlight those issues which are usually neglected. For example, recently as in almost 4 or 5 years ago, there was this bill on the right to disconnect from digital networks. Like sometimes you might have your bosses, if you're working in a software company and your cutoff time is 9 to 5, it is quite possible that your boss will call you at 8 o'clock and say, hey, I want this mail right away. Don't you have the right to have a work-life balance? So you need to disconnect, right? Right to disconnect has many other implications. I'm just giving one of the important implications. So in this context, if I say that I want the right to be disconnected and it's not taken up by any ruling party executive member, some opposition MP might be bringing it forward. But what if it doesn't see the light of the day? Isn't it important for us? It is. So issues like that will have an impact. And sometimes they will create a consensus within the parliament. They will have all the stakeholders. They will bring all the people together. And that will also have a very good impact. So you can say that private member bills are like legislative laboratories. You can experiment, you can debate. But just because there is no institutionalized or a systematic procedure to make that happen, that possibility is denied. Do we have any international best practices? Can we learn from some very good practices across the world? Yes, we do. There are 3 examples. One in UK, Canada, New Zealand. In UK, there is a 10-minute rule. Like the MP is given 10 minutes to briefly lay down the idea of that bill. What is it meant? What problem is it solving? What is the impact it will have? And then ask the rest of the parliament or rest of the legislative house to consider that bill for further discussion. At least they have a dedicated window for that. And that will make things a reality. That's point number 1. Then you have Canada, which will use the lottery system. Through that lottery system, they will pick one issue. New Zealand. New Zealand, where there is this lottery system. Through that lottery system, they will pick one issue, bring it to the legislative houses and carry out the deliberation. And then you have the third case, Canada. They will have fixed slots for this discussion, unlike in India. Okay, so this is the problem. We discuss the philosophical importance of the conceptual understanding of democracy, why it is important to have parliamentary safeguards for PMBs. We saw the issue. Then we also have to look at a solution. You're all problem solvers, like I told you. Unless and until you can think of a solution. Okay, can you tell me a solution, like practical solution? What can you do? If you have to create a rule book that this should happen, what will you do? Just don't look at the board or anything. Think from your common sense. There is no fixed time. What is the fix? Dedicate some time. It's as simple as that. Any other day, like Friday, should be for that. Like, say for example, and there should be a quorum. Like every member should attend. Make a rule like that. What else can we do? A party member is, like, say, a ruling party has, for all practical reasons, for political reasons, they like the bill, but they feel that if we accept that, it will give political mileage to the opposition. So they want to avoid that. How to fix this? So there should be some select committee or any shortlisting committee which crosses all the party lines. People from all the parties should be present in that. So obviously, if the cause is above everything, the cause of making that legislation into a reality is everything, it doesn't matter who brings that, right? So across the party lines, if you have the ability to transcend that ideological differences, private member bills will become a reality. Right. So these are some of the practical suggestions given. First one, we need a dedicated research cell. Why do we need that? Because parliamentarians are not sociologists. They're not public administrative students, public administration students. They're not anthropologists. They're not technical people. They might have a practical understanding of the problem, but to get into the details and the nuances, which is very much essential for making a good law, you need a dedicated researcher. So that's the first suggestion given. Then you need a screening committee to shortlist. Like I told you, this screening committee should be from multiple parties. There should be a mandated floor time. What do you mean by that? Right now, it is just arbitrarily saying that we'll push this agenda to Friday. But it's getting adjourned and they're not happening. Unlike that, there should be a fixed time slot and it should become mandatory. Cross-party sponsorship. What do you mean by this? We spoke about it, right? Like one party supporting the idea of a bill brought forth by another party member. That will give consensus and make the job easy. Fast track mechanism for socially critical issues like right to disconnect, menstrual leave, learning disabilities, etc. So these are some of the ideas which are brought forth by this private member bills, but they are yet to become laws because of this aforesaid reasons, just because they are private member bills. But they are critical issues for our society. Correct? Okay. Now that you understood the whole issue of a private member bill, can you write down an answer? Can you try to write down an answer? Just take this question down. Examine the need to encourage private member bills. Discuss the challenges discuss the challenges associated with private member bills becoming acts. What will be your intro here? See, introduction should set the context. You might have heard many advices from different people, but I'm appealing to your common sense. Whenever you read something, if the context is not clear, you're just writing a definition. See, here I asked you, what is the question here? Can you please read it out? Examine the need to encourage. I'm not asking what is private member bill. So anyone who is writing just writing this definition, a private member bill is a bill introduced by a non-minister, and leaving it at that is not writing a contextual intro. You understand my point? What is a contextual introduction? Which clearly tells me the problem. Examine the need. A private member bill is important for a deliberative democracy. You can in brackets write a private member bill, a bill by non-ministers, is important for deliberative democracy and a vibrant democracy. Then you can follow it up with the statistics. In the recent budget session, roughly around 80% of PMBs were not discussed, which highlights the importance of an institutionalized mechanism. So you have set the context of the problem very clearly. If I ask a different question on the same concept, what is a private member bill? Then you can write other definitions. So always writing skill is all about setting this context right. The reason why many people, seniors, are also not able to score well in their mains, they're repeating year after year, is because they do not understand the context. If you don't read newspapers, you will not be able to appreciate the context. On a daily basis, you have to prepare this topic like a story and then translate that story understanding into short, crisp introductions like this. Clear? Okay. The rest of the answer, the body and the conclusion, we have already discussed. You can write it down. I wanted to highlight the importance of writing a contextual introduction. Clear?